In 2022, Google estimated that 230 million unique books had been published by then. Considering all this diversity, it is unlikely that a cursed and mysterious book will ever fall into your hands. After all, there are simply incredibly few of them. And most importantly, they are all historical heritage. When we talk about cursed books, it is important to understand what we mean by being cursed. Historically, cursed books did not cause harm or misfortune simply by touching or possessing them. However, over time, such publications simply acquired a bad reputation. We talk about books that throughout history have been blamed for madness, their own misfortunes and death. Book of Thoth. The Book of Thoth, apparently, was an ancient papyrus, secretly copied many times, which was at least 10,000 years old, and perhaps even 20,000. But a material object is in no way a symbol. A material object can always be destroyed, for example, by fire. Later we will see that this is exactly what happened to him. Let us deal first of all with Thoth himself. He was depicted as a man with the head of an ibis. In his hands he held a reed pen and a palette of ink, which was used for writing on parchment. His other two symbols are the moon and the baboon. According to the most ancient legend, Thoth invented writing and was the chronicler of all the meetings of the gods. The cult of Thoth is associated with the city of Hermopolis, about which little is known, and with the underground kingdoms, about which even less is known. Subsequently, Thoth will be identified with Hermes. He created writing and wrote the main book, the famous Book of Thoth, the oldest of the most ancient books, which contained the secret of boundless power. We find the first hint of this book in the Thuris Papyrus, deciphered and published in Paris in 1868. This papyrus describes a conspiracy against the pharaoh, the goal of which was to destroy the pharaoh and his main advisors through magic using wax figurines depicting them. The conspirators were brutally dealt with. 40 officers and 6 noble ladies were sentenced to death and executed. Others committed suicide. The cursed Book of Thoth was burned for the first time. However, later the book will appear again in the history of Egypt. We will see it in the hands of Honorius, the son of Ramesses II. It was believed that this was an authentic copy of the book, written not by a scribe, but by Thoth's own hand. If you believe the documents, this book allowed you to look at the sun without squinting. She also gave power over the earth, ocean, and celestial bodies. With its help, it was possible to discover the secret methods of communication that animals resort to, resurrect the dead and influence at a distance. All this is known from ancient Egyptian papyri. Of course, such a book was fraught with incredible danger. Honorius consigned her to the fire or pretended to do so. Further in the same text it is said that this book is not subject to fire and cannot be destroyed by fire, so, as we see, the story is full of contradictions. And indeed, the destruction of the book, if it happened at all, turned out to be temporary. The book appears again in the inscriptions on the stele that Muhammad Ali Pasha gave to Metternich and which went down in history under his name. The stela was discovered in 1828, and it dates back to 360 BC. Therefore, on the scale of Egyptian history, this is a modern document. Among other things, it protected against scorpion bites, but this property is quite difficult to verify, since scorpions are not found in Austria. This stele depicts more than 300 gods. And between them are planets revolving around other stars. This is not fiction. Most modern researchers of Metternich stele are convinced that it is of great interest for novels. He personally announces on this stele that he ordered his book to be burned and that he expelled the demon Seth and the 7 teachers of evil. This time, it seems, the matter was completed, in 360 BC. The Book of Thoth was solemnly destroyed. And yet this is also just the beginning of the story. Around 300 BC, he appears again. This time he is identified with Hermes Trismegistus, the founder of alchemy. Every self-respecting magician, especially in Alexandria, claimed to have the Book of Thoth. Although no one ever saw the book, every time one of the magicians began to boast that he had obtained it, an accident ended his life. From the beginning of the 1st century BC, and until the end of the 2nd century AD, many books appeared, which together made up the Corpus Hermeticum. Since the 5th century, these texts have been collected. They contain references to the Book of Thoth, but there is not a single exact indication that would allow it to be found. The most famous works of this series are Asclepius, Kore Cosmou, and Poimandres. They all mention the Book of Thoth, but do not contain a single direct quote from it and thus do not provide any opportunity to look into it. Asclepius, however, gives amazing examples of the power of disappeared civilizations. Our ancestors mastered the art of creating gods. They made statues, and since they did not know how to create souls, they called upon the spirits of demons and angels and, with the help of sacred magic, placed them in the statues of gods. And they did good and evil. This is how the Egyptian gods and Thoth himself were created, but who was their creator? Nothing is said about this great civilization that existed before Egypt. As Asclepius states, these gods were still active in the time of Christ. They live in a large city located in the mountains of Libya, but I will say nothing more about that. Be that as it may, no one has yet seen it either printed or reproduced in any other way. A strange legend dates back to the 15th century, according to which a secret society that owned the Book of Thoth distributed its summary on publicly available cards. That is, we are talking about the famous deck of cards for playing tarot. This idea was first expressed by Antoine Coeur de Gebelin in his book The Primitive World. Coeur de Gebelin, scientist, member of the Royal Academy of La Rochelle, published 9 volumes of this work from 1773 to 1783. There he says that he gained access to an ancient Egyptian book that survived the destruction of Alexandria. It contained impeccably preserved instructions on the most interesting topics. This ancient Egyptian book is tarot cards. They came down to us in the form of playing cards. In the 18th century, any charlatan could claim to have the Book of Thoth. None of them presented it, but until 1825 many died for it at the fires of the Inquisition in Spain, because in 1825 the fires of the Inquisition were still burning. In the 19th, as well as in the 20th century, there was also no shortage of charlatans who claimed that they had papyrus or the Book of Thoth, but accidents that happened to those who allegedly owned the book became too frequent, so no one dared publish it anymore. One thing is certain: if there were a translation of the Book of Thoth, the authenticity of which would be proven and supported by a photograph of the original, not a single publisher would dare to publish it without hesitation. The original story was discovered in the book The Wisdom of the Egyptians by Brian Brown, New York, 1928. Lynn Carter cites it in the anthology Golden Tales of Antiquity. The Egyptian papyrus on which this story is told is approximately 33 centuries old. Neferkata got on the trail of the Book of Thoth thanks to a former priest. The book was guarded by scorpions and snakes, including an immortal snake. She was enclosed in caskets, nested one inside the other, which rested at the bottom of the river. With the help of the magician, the priest of Isis, Nefer-Kata lifted the casket with a magical lift. Then he cut the immortal snake in two and buried both halves in the sand far apart so that they would not reunite. Then I read the first page of the book and comprehended the sky, the earth, the abyss, the mountains, and the sea, the language of birds, fish and animals. He read the second page and saw the sun shining in the night sky, surrounded by huge figures of the gods themselves. Then he returned home, took a new papyrus and a jug of beer, wrote secret formulas from the book of Thoth on the papyrus, washed them off with beer, and drank this beer. And all the knowledge of the great magician ended up in him, but he returned from the land of the dead and brutally avenged himself. The son of Nefer-Kata, and then Nefer-Kata himself and his wife died. Nefer-Kata was buried with honors, like a king's son, and the secret Book of Thoth was buried with him, but, apparently, not forever. The Book of Thoth appears again and again over the centuries. A later legend says that the mummy of Nefer-Kata, clutching the Book of Thoth in her hands, was found by Apollonius of Tyana. Stanzas of Dzyan. It is difficult to find out who was the first to mention the book, which was brought to India and allegedly arrived from Venus, and when. Apparently, this was done by the French astronomer Bagley at the end of the 18th century, but it is quite possible that information about this will be found in earlier sources. The Frenchman Louis Jacquelot in the 19th century called this book Stanzas of Dzyan. Beginning in the mid-19th century, it became clear that accidents had happened to people who claimed to possess this book, but it was Madame Blavatsky who gave Chang's Stanzas its true scope. At the end of the 18th century, French astronomer Jean Bailly mentioned a powerful book containing the secrets of the universe. She came to him from India, shortly before he was sentenced to death. In the 19th century, this tome was called Stanzas of Dzyan. It becomes clear to researchers that everyone who owned this book was haunted by accidents and misfortunes. This happened until the stanzas came to Helena Blavatsky. This book turned the life of young Blavatsky upside down. Amazing metamorphoses begin to happen to her. But more on that later. It is very difficult to speak impartially about Elena Petrovna's personality. The most opposing opinions are still fighting in people's minds. Elena gone, Blavatsky's maiden name, was the first child in the family of an officer of a horse artillery battery, Colonel Pyotr Alexeyevich Gone. She was born on July 31, 1831 in the city of Yekaterinoslav, Dnepropetrovsk. Since 2016, biographers of Elena Petrovna claim that from childhood she was haunted by unusual, sometimes frightening, phenomena. During the baptism of little Elena, the priest's cassock caught fire. The servant received severe burns and almost died. At the age of 5, one of her playmates jumped into the river out of nowhere and drowned. Relatives of the deceased child claimed that their son was hypnotized by Elena. As a teenager, Blavatsky showed the gift of clairvoyance. She cooperates with the police, looking for criminals whom the authorities could not find. The girl's special talents inspired horror in those around her. All the neighbors turned on her. They tried to put her in jail until she explained her options. Relatives intervened in the situation. In the hope that young Elena will calm down, she is married off. But Blavatsky does not resign herself to fate and runs away from home. He boards a ship to Constantinople, and from there he goes to Egypt. In Cairo, Blavatsky met a Coptic mystic. He taught her to read with the help of clairvoyance and told her about the cursed book, Stanzas of Dzyan or Book of Dzyan. According to the mystic, the stanzas contain unique knowledge about the world, helping to create a holistic picture of the universe, including all spheres of existence: physical, spiritual, philosophical, religious. He argued that the Book of Dzyan is revealed only in parts, only to the initiates and only under the guidance of the great teachers. According to the Coptic magician, this book revealed secret knowledge that came from other planets and related to a history that dates back hundreds of millions of years. Howard Lovecraft wrote, "Theosophists talk about such things that make the blood run cold if they do not talk about them with blissful and disarming optimism." Much later, Helena Blavatsky would say that she had Dzyan stanzas as an actual book. And she even translated it into English. But the original, along with her work, disappeared without a trace from the safe deposit box where it was kept. After Cairo, Blavatsky traveled for several years and eventually settled in London. There she meets a legendary figure. One could Lal Singh. This man, if he is a man, of course, is remarkable in that there is not a single reliable evidence left that he really existed. Whatever the truth, Kudhumi wrote to Blavatsky. Some of his letters were even published. He wrote about many things, among other things, about the dangers of weapons based on the use of atomic energy, and the resulting need to keep certain secrets. And this is almost 150 years ago. Thanks to these letters and stanzas, Madame Blavatsky, who until then had not been particularly enlightened, turned into one of the most educated and knowledgeable women of the 19th century in matters of science. Her life's work, The Secret Doctrine, perfectly illustrates the depth of her knowledge. They are quite extensive. From nuclear physics to linguistics. In addition, Blavatsky's knowledge includes a number of sciences still unknown to the modern scientific community. The Secret of Abbot Trithemius. Steganography. Abbot Trithemius was born in 1462 and died in 1516. He had many biographers, including Paul Chacornac, author of the book The Greatness and Misfortune of Abbot Trithemius. Without stopping the traditional works of a scientist and historian, he continued his completely original research. Very strange research, which he had the imprudence to communicate in letters to certain chatterboxes or envious people, which was not in vain. During his studies, he created a way to hypnotize people at a distance through telepathy and using a special language. His works intricately mixed linguistics, mathematics, Kabbalistics, and parapsychology. The 8-volume work, which united the books of his research and, therefore, contained the secrets of unlimited power, was called Steganography. The manuscript of Steganography was burned by order of Count Elector Philip, Viceroy of Philip II, who discovered it in his father's library and was horrified by it. Not a single complete copy of this book has survived. The manuscript, which contained the key to the greatest possibilities, was completely destroyed. Not a single copy of it has survived. So what was Steganography all about? Let us first quote the words of Trithemius himself. One day in the year 1499 mentioned above, after I had long dreamed of uncovering unknown mysteries, and had finally become convinced of the futility of my efforts, I went to bed, a little ashamed of my recklessness in trying to accomplish the impossible. At night, in a dream, a man appeared to me and called me by name, Trithemius. He told me, "Do not consider all these thoughts to be reckless. Even though neither you nor anyone else will be able to achieve the things you strive for, they are possible. Then teach me, I answered, "How can I achieve this?" And then he revealed the secret to me and showed me that nothing could be simpler. After this, TRITHEMIUS set to work, and here is his own story of what he achieved. I can assure you that everyone, and especially the ignorant, will decide that this work of mine, in which I reveal many unknown secrets and mysteries, contains supernatural, amazing and incredible things, since no one before me has ever written or talked about it. After his death, Abbot TRITHEMIUS gained a reputation as a black magician. One of the most ferocious Jesuits of the Del Rio Inquisition will ask why steganography, which circulated in the form of fragmentary notes, was not placed on the list of banned and censored books. It was not until 1610 in Frankfurt that Matthias Becker published the first edition of what remained of steganography. It is marked with the blessing and permission of the highest, but the church authorities did not give any permission for publication. Consequently, the question arises about which supreme ones we are talking about. Much later, Father Lebrun reported that the use of the secrets of steganography implied the use of a device that, apparently, had much in common with our modern radio equipment. Let us quote one passage from his writings, "For this science is boundless chaos, the depths of which no one can comprehend, because, despite all the knowledge and skill in this matter, what you manage to grasp will always be much less than what is unknown to you." This deep and very secret skill actually has the peculiarity that the student can easily surpass the teacher, if only this student is naturally given abilities of this kind and if he shows zeal in the sciences of Jewish bondage. In case any reader of my work is struck by the name, order, and nature of some operations addressed to spirits, and on this basis imagines that I am a wizard, a necromancer, or have entered into a deal with evil spirits and are involved in one or another superstition. With this preface, I considered it necessary to declare a solemn protest and thereby protect my glory and my name from such dishonor. The chaos in which all this science resides, is this not what will later be called the collective unconscious? It may be good that TRITHEMIUS's secret was lost, but there is no doubt that TRITHEMIUS really made a great and dangerous discovery. What John Dee saw in the Black Mirror. Hieroglyphic monad, John Dee was born in 1527 and died in 1608. And his life was so amazing that novelists in their writings described it better than most biographers. These novelists were Jean Rey and Gustav Meyrink. John Dee was an outstanding mathematician and expert in classical philology. He put forward the idea of the prime meridian. This is the Greenwich meridian. He brought 2 Mercator globes and navigation instruments to England from Leuven. Thus, he found himself at the origins of England's maritime expansion, simultaneously with the publication of the first English translation of Euclid and with the study of the possibilities of using telescopes and binoculars in the English army. He continued research related to steganography. What happened on May 25, 1581 exceeded all his expectations. A superhuman, or at least non-human, creature appeared to him, surrounded by radiance. For simplicity, John Dee called this creature an angel. The angel left him a black mirror, which is still kept in the British Museum. This is a perfectly polished piece of coal. The angel told him that by looking into this crystal, he would see other worlds and would be able to come into contact with intelligent beings of a different, non-human nature. Most of the notes John Dee made and the books he prepared were, as we will soon see, destroyed. However, enough fragments remain to reconstruct the language spoken by these creatures, which Dee called the Eno-Sheik language. This language was either the first known artificial language or the first known non-human language. In any case, it was a complete system with its own alphabet and its own grammar. Some of the texts that have come down to us in the Enochic language contain mathematical knowledge, the level of which is much higher than that existing in the time of John Dee published a strange book, the Hieroglyphic Monad. He worked on it for 7 years, but after reading Steganography, he finished the book in 12 days. The statesman of his time, Sir William Cecil, then declared that the secrets contained in the hieroglyphic monad are of the greatest importance for the security of the state. Be that as it may, Dee seems to us to be a person to whom creatures of a non-human nature appeared, a person who learned their language and established a constant connection with them. The case is completely unique, especially considering that we are talking about a person with such a powerful intellect as John Dee. Unfortunately, from the information that Dee left, nothing can be concluded either about the habitat of these creatures or about their physical nature. He simply said that they were telepathic and could travel to the past and future. As far as I know, this is the first time the idea of time travel has appeared here. John Dee hoped to find out from the angels the entire set of natural laws, everything related to the future development of mathematical sciences. The crux of the matter is not necromancy or even spiritualism. Dee took the position of a scientist who wants to penetrate secrets, but only secrets that have a scientific basis. By the way, he himself constantly calls himself a mathematical philosopher. Most of Dee's notes were lost in a fire in his house. Others were destroyed at different times by different people. Several fragments have come down to us, contained in the true story of Casaubon and some other surviving notes. From them you can glean extremely interesting information. Dee, in particular, argues that the Mercator projection is only a first rough approximation. In his opinion, the Earth is not actually completely round, but consists of many superimposed spheres, aligned along another dimension. Between these spheres there are points, or rather surfaces of contact, and thus Greenland in other worlds extends to infinity. That is why John Dee submits numerous petitions to Queen Elizabeth, in which he convinces her that England must take possession of Greenland in order to have the door to other worlds at its disposal. Another statement: the mathematical sciences are in the initial phase of their development, and one can go much further than Euclid, whom Dee, we recall, was the first to translate into English. Dee was absolutely right in asserting this. His point of view was confirmed by non-Euclidean geometries that appeared later. John Dee also says that it is possible to create machines that will do all the work for a person. And this, he adds, had already been done elsewhere in 1585. Curious to know what this place is, a black stone from another world, having passed through the hands of first the Count de Peterborough, and then Horace Walpole, is now in the British Museum, whose administration does not allow it to be used or examined, Dee's hieroglyphic monad, or get a photocopy of it. But without the keys to various ciphers, without other manuscripts of John Dee, burned in Mortlake or destroyed by order of King James I, there will be little use. Necronomicon, a fictional book created by Howard Lovecraft and often mentioned in literary works based on the Cthulhu mythos. The book contains the names of the ancients, their history, as well as the method of summoning them. The Necronomicon states that the book is dangerous to read because it can harm the physical and mental health of the reader. Therefore, in all libraries it is kept behind 7 locks. First of all, this book is known for its discussions of the primordial times, and begins with the conversation of demons. Alhazard had access to many now lost sources and was able to study in detail events only hinted at in the Book of Genesis. the apocryphal Book of Enoch and other traditions. It can be said that Alhazard used dubious magical methods to clarify the details of prehistoric events, but his critical mind and desire to explore the hidden meaning of mythological and sacred stories make him similar to the Greek writers of the 5th century BC, such as Thucydides. His reasoning looks surprisingly modern, and this, in particular, may explain his current popularity. He believed that before the human race appeared, the earth was inhabited by other species of living beings, and that humanity acquired a lot of knowledge through encounters with beings from other spheres. He shared with some Neoplatonics the belief that the stars are like our sun and that planets invisible from Earth revolve around them, on which special forms of life exist. But Alhazard greatly complicated these beliefs and expanded them with metaphysical speculations representing these life forms as parts of a cosmic hierarchy of spiritual evolution. He was convinced that he had communicated with these beings, the ancients, using magical spells, and warned that these monstrous forces were waiting for the hour to return and reclaim their rights to the earth. He who is forever embraced by darkness is not dead. In the abyss of years, death itself will die. Surah 1. This book is about the secrets that were revealed to the one who wrote it during dangerous journeys through earthly deserts and unearthly countries. The lowest of the underground caves are inaccessible to the eye of the beholder, for their miracles are incomprehensible and terrifying. Cursed is the land where dead thoughts come to life in new and bizarre incarnations. The mind that is outside the head that bears it is vicious. Ibn Shakabayo spoke great wisdom, saying, "Blessed is that grave where there is no sorcerer, blessed is that city whose sorcerers lie in the dust." For the ancient belief says that a soul sold to the devil does not rush to leave the confines of the crypt, but feeds and teaches the gnawing worm itself, until a new monstrous life breaks through the decay and decay, and the pitiful eaters of carrion gain cunning to harm and strength to destroy. Huge passages are secretly made where ordinary earthly pores would suffice, and those born to crawl learn to walk. The Necronomicon also tells about the great meaningless essence of Azathoth and his location in the heart of chaos, allegorical mathematical descriptions of the properties of space, the relationship of known and unknown dimensions. Unfortunately, the Necronomicon was invented from start to finish by Lovecraft. VOYNICH manuscript. Dr. John Dee was an avid collector of strange manuscripts. It was he who, between 1584 and 1588, presented the mysterious Voynich manuscript to Emperor Rudolph II, the Duke of Northumberland, during the reign of Henry VIII, plundered many monasteries. In one of them he found a manuscript that his family gave to John Dee, whose interest in unusual phenomena and mysterious texts was widely known. If you believe the documents found, this manuscript came from the pen of Roger Bacon himself, 1214 to 1294. Roger Bacon had a reputation as a great magician, although in fact he was mainly interested in what we today call scientific experiments, and was one of the first to perform them. Voynich manuscript is a perfect example of a cursed book that escaped destruction only because it could not be deciphered and therefore did not pose an immediate threat. The book is an unbound volume. From the numbering it follows that 28 pages are lost. Miniatures in 5 colors: blue, yellow, red, brown and green. They depict naked women, approximately 400 fantastic plants and diagrams. The writing style is usual medieval. Graphological analysis allows us to conclude that the scribe knew the language in which he worked, since he wrote fluently and did not copy letter by letter. The cipher used seems simple, but it cannot be solved. Voynich died in 1930. His wife's heirs sold the manuscript to the bookseller Kraus. It can still be bought today for $160,000. In my opinion, if John Dee was so interested in the manuscript, it means that he saw in it, as in TRITHEMIUS' Steganography, an encrypted text in a language known to him, which may not have been a human language. Roger Bacon, like others before and after him, gained access to knowledge that came either from a lost civilization or from extraterrestrial intelligence. And again, some people thought and continue to think that the prematurely revealed secrets of a science that surpasses ours in its level are capable of destroying our civilization. Mather's manuscript, like the Steganography and the Voynich manuscript, is encrypted. But he kindly hid behind a fairly simple double permutation cipher, which made it possible to quickly decipher it. This decryption revealed the most amazing occult history of our time, the history of the Golden Dawn Order. It also led to the appearance of a number of documents, magical and cursed, which were not published, but which had already caused a lot of trouble. Mathers, on October 29, 1896, he published a manifesto in which he declared the existence of a third level of the order. This third level, he says, consists of superhuman beings. As for me, he writes, I personally believe that these are people and they live on Earth. But they have monstrous superhuman power. When I meet them in public, they don't stand out in either their appearance or their clothes. What distinguishes them is only the feeling of indestructible health and physical strength emanating from them, that is, the very physical qualities that, according to legend, are inherent in those who possess the elixir of longevity. If, on the other hand, the meeting takes place in a secret place, they are dressed in symbolic clothing and wear the insignia of their rank. Of course, you can think whatever you want about the contents of the manifesto, consider Mathers crazy, but it's still worth assuming that he's not lying. One thing is certain, it would be better for him to remain silent. From that moment on, he became the object of persecution, which led to his death. At the same time, the manifesto attracted very undesirable people into society, such as the infamous Aleister Crowley. In addition, we have a lot of evidence about Golden Dawn. Therefore, it is quite possible to draw some conclusions. First of all, the high level of intelligence and education of most of the members of the order is striking. Golden Dawn included not only major writers, but also physicists, mathematicians, military experts, and doctors. There is no doubt that everyone who was a member of Golden Dawn left enriched. Everyone claimed that their lives had become better, found fullness, beauty and meaning, and that Golden Dawn gave them all this. Gustav Meyrink wrote, "We know that the awakening of the immortal self is possible." Golden Dawn certainly knew how to evoke such an awakening, in the order the eternal dream of alchemists, Gnostics, Kabbalists and Rosicrucians came true. Let's name just one of the main aspects of research: change in the person himself. No matter how skeptical one may be about magic, and I am very skeptical about it, it is nevertheless impossible not to admit that the Order of the Golden Dawn, more than anyone else in the entire known history of mankind, was successful in magical experience, and, what is even more important, the Order was able to disseminate this experience. For thousands of years, man has dreamed of a state of spirit that is more awakened than during simple awakening. Golden Dawn certainly achieved this. It is likely that members of the Order were able to decipher the Enochic alphabet of John Dee. And therefore the leaders of the Order read the works of John Dee, TRITHEMIUS and, perhaps, the Voynich manuscript, If only they had a copy of it, which is not excluded, since John Dee made many copies of it. Mather's Mystical Works and Translations. Kabbalah, 1889. King Solomon, 1889. The Sacred Magic of Abramelin, 1898. The last of these books is a translation of a manuscript found by Mathers in the Arsenal Library, an inexhaustible treasure trove of strange documents. A fairly complete edition of it appeared in 1962, in Paris. So, we have at our disposal many very interesting fragments, but still there is no complete set of Mathers rituals. And it should become the pinnacle of all damned books, absorbing most of what they contain and opening up absolutely amazing paths. The fact that Mathers could make the transition to a higher form of consciousness, which he interpreted as contact with unknown higher ones, does not seem absurd at all. And the fact that he was persecuted for this is also not surprising. Those members of Golden Dawn who have survived to this day tell interesting things about the use of the Enochic language, but they are not necessarily believed. They talk, for example, about playing Enochic chess. The game resembled chess, only the pieces depicted Egyptian gods. They played with an invisible opponent. The pieces on the second half of the chessboard moved by themselves. Even when this experiment is portrayed as a mixture of automatic writing and telekinesis, it has a peculiar poetic charm. All this makes us even more regretful about the loss of the Mathers vault. The mind-beating book, Excalibur, along the oceans of our planet. It flies under a flag that does not belong to any known country. There are quite a few armed guards on board, because there have already been attempts to break into the captain's safe. This safe contains an extremely dangerous book, the reading of which makes you lose your mind, and it is called Excalibur. In order for this whole story to become clear, we must turn to the life of the owner of the yacht, the American Lafayette Ron Hubbard, and to his two discoveries, dianetics and Scientology. Lafayette Ron Hubbard is a daring explorer and an infinitely brave officer in the United States Navy, there is no doubt about it. He was also one of America's finest fantasy and science fiction authors. His best works, when it comes to fantasy and science fiction, were written before the First World War. During the war, Hubbard, wounded in battle with the Japanese, experienced clinical death. He was resuscitated, but it seems that he did not lose consciousness, as usually happens, and remembered his sensations in a state of clinical death, which he could never fully explain. After the war, Hubbard began to think persistently about the human nervous system. And in the end he created a new theory, which he dubbed dianetics. He told John Campbell, a famous science fiction publisher, about it. Dianetics is a form of psychoanalysis designed to captivate Americans. After all, they love everything where the do-it-yourself principle applies, and dianetics allows you to exercise your abilities without any prior training. Hubbard wrote the book Scientology. And he wrote down memories of his previous existences for his closest friends. These memories, he said, are associated with a great galactic civilization, of which we are a lost colony. He collected his memories in the book Excalibur, which he gave to several volunteers to read. They all went crazy. Neither dianetics, nor psychoanalysis, nor Scientology, nor even any of the known drugs can help them. Hubbard continues to surf the oceans and make notes, while unknown individuals are trying to break into his safe in order to read Excalibur. Meanwhile, the development of Scientology continues, which causes great concern in the world. Thus, Charles Manson, the murderer of Sharon Tate, declared himself a local representative of Scientology. Scientists themselves deny this, and Hubbard even claims that he pointed Manson to the FBI as a dangerous Satanist. Scientists are accused of manipulating people, controlling their actions, controlling them from a distance, and generally seeking to establish their dominance over the world. They calmly answer that they said the same thing about the first Christians. Unlike Golden Dawn, Scientology has become an energy center that enjoys quite dangerous real power. Nothing like this happened with dianetics. Something like this was introduced into the structure of a declining movement, which seemed to be just a sect that broke away from psychoanalysis and simplified it, and it immediately turned into a tool intended for purposes that are not yet completely clear to us. The time for jokes has passed. It's time to think about what was brought into dianetics. Why did it turn into such an energetic movement as Scientology? As at the beginning of any religion, here too there was a book. With the difference that this book, Excalibur, was not distributed, but carefully hidden, like a secret talisman of a new religion. A strange phenomenon, because in similar cases, for example among the Mormons or the Babish, their main book, the Book of Joseph Smith among the Mormons, the Prophecies of the Bab among the Babish, was widely distributed. As for Scientology, here we see, on the one hand, a modern desire for propaganda, and on the other, a firm intention to hide a secret book that could be called cursed. We don't really know what happened to the people who read it. Did they go crazy just because they read it, or did they perform some kind of experiment on themselves? As G.K. Chesterton rightly said, it is not the one who has lost his mind who is mad, the one who has lost everything except his mind is mad. The case of Professor Filipov. Revolution through Science or the End of Wars. On an October night in 1903, Russian scientist Mikhail Mikhailovich Filipov was found dead in his laboratory. They killed him, undoubtedly, on the orders of the Tsarist secret police. The police took all the scientist's papers, including the manuscript of the book, which was supposed to be his 301st publication. Emperor Nicholas II personally studied the case, after which the laboratory was destroyed and all the papers were burned. The seized manuscript was called Revolution Through Science or the End of Wars. This was not a purely theoretical work. Filipov wrote to friends, and his letters must have been opened and read by the secret police, that he had made an amazing discovery. He actually found a way to reproduce the effect of an explosion using a directed beam of short radio waves. I can reproduce the full force of an explosion with a beam of short waves, he wrote in one of the found letters. The blast wave is completely transmitted along the carrier electromagnetic wave, and thus a charge of dynamite detonated in Moscow can transmit its effect to Constantinople. Experiments I have carried out show that this phenomenon can be caused at a distance of several thousand kilometers. The use of such weapons in the revolution will lead to the fact that peoples will rebel, and wars will become completely impossible. It is clear that a threat of this kind did not leave the emperor indifferent. And everything necessary was done quickly and efficiently. If someone now found out Filipov's secret, he would probably be able to find on sale separately all the parts necessary to make the device, and without any risk to himself, blow up people he doesn't like, who are located at a great distance from him. Personally, I have my own list of people and buildings that I find disgusting and that I would like to eliminate. But if everyone could achieve their goal with the help of explosives stolen at a construction site and Filipov's homemade apparatus, it would be difficult for us to survive. They say there are lists of inventions that are too dangerous. One such list, compiled by the French military, includes at least 800 names. If anyone publishes it, it will break the record for damn books. Double Spiral, Professor James D. Watson's book, The Double Spiral, is easy to find in any bookstore. Its French translation was published by Robert Laffont. There are also several English hardcover editions and a pocket paperback edition. It nearly disappeared from circulation twice. At first no one wanted to publish it, then they tried hard to silence it. The story of this book sheds light on the nature of censorship, the motives for prohibition, and even the nature of science itself. He writes simply and frankly, "We have discovered the secret of life." And he is right. This is indeed the great secret that will allow the human race to establish control over heredity. Some scientists believe that it is necessary to destroy not only Watson's popular book, but also his scientific work itself. Eminent biologist Sir Macfarlane Barnett writes, "There are things that should not be known, they are too dangerous." But other geneticists believe that, on the contrary, it is necessary to move forward. Nobel laureate W. Nirenberg writes, "I think that in 25 years they will begin to program human cells with the help of synthetic intermediaries, and bacterial cells in 5 years." Let us note that Watson also discovered something completely new, sex in bacteria, which no one had suspected until now. In general, all his books and articles are full of new ideas. And here comes a problem that goes beyond the double spiral, the problem of silencing and censorship of discoveries. Bertrand Russell rightly writes, "Men fear original thought more than anything else on earth, more than ruin, more than death itself." But the original idea is precisely expressed in the double helix with greater force than in any other recently published book, and it is this, it seems to me, that caused and continues to cause alarm much more than the description of hostility and struggle in the scientific community. The Double Helix is a book free of any philosophical or moral considerations. The author is smarter than those dilapidated scientists whom he ridicules. But he is absolutely not burdened with a sense of responsibility for the fate of humanity. While most scientists have agreed to restrictions in disseminating their discoveries only to a very narrow circle of specialists, Watson only thinks about making them public. That's why it causes indignation. Giant Codex, Codex GIGAS, if the power of a curse were based solely on the size of the book, Codex GIGAS, aka the Devil's Bible, would probably be the most dangerous book ever written. Its weight reaches 75 kilograms and its height is 89 centimeters. This book, about 800 years old, is considered the largest surviving medieval manuscript in the world. The exact origin of the manuscript has been lost to time, but historians believe that it was written between 1204 and 1230 in a Benedictine monastery in the Czech city of Podlasis. While many illustrated texts were written by entire teams, scholars believe that the Codex GIGAS is the work of one copyist. Written entirely in Latin, the book contains the complete text of the Bible. The works of Josephus, Isidore of Seville's Etymologies, Cosmas of Prague's Bohemian Chronicle, as well as an encyclopedia with information on geometry, legal issues, medical treatises, hundreds of obituaries, several magical spells and a calendar. The book's sinister reputation stems from its full-color portrait of the devil and the legend of how the image got there. According to the stories, the book was written by a monk who broke his vows and had to be walled up within the walls of the monastery. To save himself, he made a deal. If in one night he could write a book containing all the world's knowledge, his life would be spared. When he realized that the task was impossible, the monk sold his soul to the devil, who helped him finish the book and signed it with his portrait. As for curses, legends say that in 1858, a guard was committed to a mental institution after being accidentally locked overnight in the National Library of Sweden, where the book is kept. He was allegedly found under a table the next morning, claiming to have seen Codex GIGAS join the procession of books as they danced in the air. Sacred Magic of Abramelin. The Book of Abramelin is a magical text that dates back to the 14th or 15th centuries. But it gained fame only in the 19th century thanks to magicians. One of them, Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers, created the first English translation of the book. Mather's work was liked by his colleagues, and Abramelin's book became a key text of modern occultism. The book's central motif is an elaborate, months-long ritual designed to allow the magician to communicate with his holy guardian angel. The problem is that after a 3-day period, the sorcerer must summon and defeat each and every spirit of the infernal regions, in other words, all the demons of hell. Of course, this is impossible to do, but this ritual gave rise to many legends, rumors, as well as ridiculous stories that affected the cursed history of the book. The Orphan's Story. This is a novel written by a Spanish friar named Martín de León y Cardenas sometime between 1608 and 1615. The man initially planned to publish the novel under the pseudonym Andrés de León, but this never happened. According to The Guardian, he left the book unpublished because he feared it would damage his position in the Roman Catholic Church. The book was long considered lost, but in 1965 a Spanish scholar found what is believed to be the only surviving copy in the New York archives of the Hispanic Society of America. There were several attempts to publish it, but none were successful, and rumors began to spread that the book was cursed. The project eventually found its way to a Peruvian philologist named Belinda Palacios, who spent 2 years preparing the manuscript for publication. Soon after she signed on to edit the book, strange things began to happen. Several people who worked on the text died, one from a strange disease, the second in a car accident. In 2017, 400 years after it was written, The Orphan's Tale was finally published. The Grand Grimoire, in his 1898 text, The Book of Black Magic and Pacts, British occultist and scholar Arthur Edward Waite calls the Grand Grimoire one of four specific and undisguised manuals of black magic. The book contains detailed instructions for summoning Satan's right hand, Lucifuge Roficale. It was the book's popularity, rather than its content, that may have led to its reputation as dangerous or cursed. In France, the Grand Grimoire was one of several books of spells that were widely circulated in collections and sold in bookstores during the 19th century. The Great Omar. The book was published to order as a collection of quatrains by the 11th century Persian poet Omar Khayyam. Until 1911, no one had any idea about it, but one day bookbinder Francis Sangorsky was tasked with making the greatest bookbinding at any price. Sangorsky worked for 2 years. He used 9.2 square meters of gold leaf, 5,000 pieces of leather and more than 1,000 precious stones, including rubies, topazes and emeralds. But as soon as it was finished, the bookstore had problems with sales. They decided to try their hand at the American book market, but due to disagreements with American customs officials, the book was sent back to London. The book was eventually sold at auction to an American buyer. And the Great Lobster sailed across the Atlantic on the Titanic. The masterpiece was never recovered from the wreck of the Titanic, but the Great Lobster was recreated in the 1930s based on Sangorsky's designs. Bookbinder Stanley Bray completed his version just before the outbreak of World War II. To protect the new edition from German bombs, it was placed in a vault in London, which eventually became one of the first sites to be attacked by Nazi warplanes. The safe in which the book was kept survived the explosion, but the book did not. The temperature inside the container rose so high that the leather and paper components of the book melted and charred. According to The Independent, only the jewelry survived, Bray, and over the course of 40 years he spent about 4,000 hours creating the third edition of the Great Omar. This version seems to have escaped the curse. It is still safely preserved in the British Library. Grimoire of Honorius, Grimoire of Honorius, also called the Constitution of Honorius. This text may have been authored in the 16th century but was first published in Rome in 1629. It gained wide circulation during the 17th century. The authorship is attributed to Pope Honorius III, who is credited with rites of exorcism. The book shows influences from the LEMEGETON and claims to be based on the practical Kabbalah, but this connection is tenuous. Rather, it is the only grimoire to introduce significant Christian elements, which earned it the reputation of the blackest of black magic texts. The grimoire is cast as a papal bull in which the Pope decrees that the authorities of the Church, from cardinals to secular clerks, should have the power of invoking and commanding spirits of all sorts. This power had been vested with the papal office as the successor to Saint Peter. The rituals in Honorius combine Kabbalistic elements such as the 72 sacred names of God and Christian elements such as confessions, litanies, masses of the Holy Ghost and angels, the office of the dead, the Gospel of John, and various prayers with gruesome sacrifices of animals. The effect is more like a black mass than anything sacred. The 1670 edition of Honorius includes a rite of exorcism for both humans and animals. The 1800 edition calls for using holy water in human exorcisms. In animal possessions, it prescribes the use of salt exorcised with blood drawn from a bewitched animal. 6th and 7th Books of Moses. The 6th and 7th Books of Moses is an 18th or 19th century magical text allegedly written by Moses, and passed down as hidden, or lost, books of the Hebrew Bible. Self-described as the wonderful arts of the old Hebrews, taken from the Mosaic books of the Kabbalah and the Talmud, it is actually a grimoire, or text of magical incantations and seals, that purports to instruct the reader in the spells used to create some of the miracles portrayed in the Bible as well as to grant other forms of good fortune and good health. The work contains reputed Talmudic magic names, words, and ideograms, some written in Hebrew and some with letters from the Latin alphabet. It contains seals, or magical drawings accompanied by instructions intended to help the user perform various tasks, from controlling weather or people to contacting the dead or biblical religious figures. The printed texts of the 6th and 7th Books of Moses, from 1849, combine two purportedly lost short biblical texts with several contemporary essays and half a dozen purported writings of those who kept this knowledge and practiced its use through history, dated from biblical times to the 17th century. These works attempt to paint a portrait of secret knowledge which Moses was given by God, and then handed down father to son until King Solomon, when it was handed to priests, and finally, Talmudic scholars. In Christian circles, the text appealed to the same authority as did biblical apocrypha, biblical texts outside the current biblical canon. Containing numerous allegedly magical spells used to summon spirits to do the will of the conjurer, the books are attributed to works in which Moses sets forth the magic which enabled him to defeat the magicians of Egypt, part the Red Sea, and perform the acts attributed to him in the Old Testament. Although these are allegedly Kabbalistic in nature, there is very little or no influence of Kabbalah within the pages. Most texts are reputed to be Hebrew, passed to the editors through European Talmudic scholars or Christian medieval ecclesiastics who were privy to secret biblical texts. Some of the texts are allegedly translated from a text written by Canaanite magicians and keepers of the Samaritan Pentateuch in the Cuthan Samaritan language, a language considered extinct since the 12th century. Key of Solomon. The Key of Solomon, also known as the Greater Key of Solomon, is a pseudepigraphical grimoire attributed to King Solomon. It probably dates back to the 14th or 15th century Italian Renaissance. It presents a typical example of Renaissance magic. Any such grimoires attributed to King Solomon were written during the Renaissance, ultimately being influenced by earlier works of Jewish Theosophical Kabbalah and Muslim magicians. 1. These, in turn, incorporated aspects of the Greco-Roman magic of late antiquity. 2. Several versions of the Key of Solomon exist, in various translations, with minor to significant differences. The original type of text was probably a Latin or Italian text dating to the 14th or 15th century. Most surviving manuscripts date from the late 16th, 17th, or 18th century. There is also an early Greek manuscript dating to the 15th century, British Library, Harley MS 5596, that is closely associated with the text. The Greek manuscript is referred to as the Magical Treatise of Solomon, and was published by Armand de Lat in Anecdota Atheniensia, Liège, 1927, pages 397 to 445. Its contents are very similar to the Clavicula. LEMEGETON, the Lesser Key of Solomon, also known as LEMEGETON Clavicula Salomonis, or simply LEMEGETON, is an anonymously authored grimoire on sorcery. It was compiled in the mid-17th century, mostly from materials several centuries older. It is divided into 5 books: the Ars Goetia, Ars Theurgia Goetia, Ars Paulina, Ars Almadel, and Ars Notoria. It is based on the Testament of Solomon and the ring mentioned within it that he used to seal demons. The text is more properly called LEMEGETON Clavicula Salomonis, or the Little Key of Solomon. The title most commonly used, the Lesser Key of Solomon, does not in fact occur in the manuscripts. A. Waite, in his 1898 book of Black Magic and of Pacts, does use the terms so-called Greater Key and Lesser Key to distinguish between the Clavicula Salomonis and LEMEGETON. So he may have been the first one to coin it. The Latin term Goetia refers to the evocation of demons or evil spirits. It is derived from the ancient Greek word gamma omicron eta tau epsilon alpha, goetia, meaning charm, witchcraft, or jugglery. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, Goetia was generally considered evil and heretical, in contrast to Theurgia, theurgy, and magia naturalis, natural magic, which were sometimes considered more noble. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, in his 3 books of occult philosophy, writes, "Now the parts of ceremonial magic are Goetia and Theurgia. Goetia is unfortunate, by the commerces of unclean spirits made up of the rites of wicked curiosities, unlawful charms, and deprecations, and is abandoned and execrated by all laws." Picatrix. Picatrix is the Latin name used today for a 400-page book of magic and astrology originally written in Arabic under the title Gayat al-Akm, which most scholars assume was originally written in the middle of the 11th century, though an argument for composition in the first half of the 10th century has been made. The Arabic title translates as the aim of the sage or the goal of the wise. The Arabic work was translated into Spanish and then into Latin during the 13th century, at which time it got the Latin title Picatrix. The book's title Picatrix is also sometimes used to refer to the book's author. Picatrix is a composite work that synthesizes older works on magic and astrology. One of the most influential interpretations suggests it is to be regarded as a handbook of talismanic magic. Another researcher summarizes it as the most thorough exposition of celestial magic in Arabic, indicating the sources for the work as Arabic texts on Hermeticism, Sabianism, Ismailism, astrology, alchemy and magic produced in the Near East in the 9th and 10th centuries AD. Eugenio Guerin declares, in reality the Latin version of the Picatrix is as indispensable as the Corpus Hermeticum or the writings of Albumacer for understanding a conspicuous part of the production of the Renaissance, including the figurative arts. 6. It has significantly influenced West European esotericism from Marsilio Ficino in the 15th century to Thomas Campanella in the 17th century. The manuscript in the British Library passed through several hands: Simon Forman, Richard Napier, Elias Ashmole, and William Lilly. The theme of cursed books, constantly destroyed throughout human history, has inspired many novelists, such as Lovecraft, Sax Rohmer, Edgar Wallace.